So in this conversation about the resurrection, I think it's first important to establish what do we mean by historical fact. If we're going to say the resurrection is a historical fact, what do we mean by this? What criteria would historians agree on as to when something can actually be considered a fact? What is the burden of proof needed? Flowing from this, what proof would be needed if we were to be able to reach the conclusion in favor of Jesus historically rising from the dead?
Mm-hmm. The resurrection of Jesus is such an extraordinary, singular event that you wouldn't think that there would be much historically to be said in support of it. But in my work in Germany, what I discovered is that the wide majority of New Testament critics today who are students of the historical Jesus are largely agreed upon the central facts that undergird the inference to the resurrection of Jesus. Now, in speaking of historical facts, what we mean are events that actually happened. These are things that happened whether anyone believes in them or not. Even if no one knew about it, if it really happened, then that counts as a historical fact. And as historians weigh various historical hypotheses, they use different criteria to try to determine what counts as a historical fact. And these would be criteria like explanatory power, explanatory scope, plausibility, accord with accepted beliefs, degree of ad hocness, and so forth. And I would argue that when you weigh the central facts for the resurrection of Jesus, that the resurrection of Jesus emerges as the best explanation of these facts. So the burden of proof that you asked about will be comparative. It's what philosophers call inference to the best explanation. You establish a body of facts to be explained, and then you compile a pool of live options, live hypotheses for explaining these facts. And then these hypotheses are assessed on the basis of criteria like the one that I listed. And one isn't trying to say that there's one that is mathematically certain or demonstrated to be true above all the others. What one is saying simply is when you compare these historical hypotheses using these criteria, that sometimes one hypothesis will emerge as the best explanation of the evidence. And my thesis is that the best explanation of the facts concerning the fate of Jesus of Nazareth is the one that the original disciples gave, namely, God raised Jesus from the dead. Now, having said that, immediately we confront a historical problem. That is a supernatural explanation, isn't it? To say God raised Jesus from the dead, that posits a miracle. And many historians would say that as historians, they are methodologically bound or restricted to considering only naturalistic explanations of the evidence. And therefore, they are methodologically prohibited as historians from drawing such an inference. Well, that's fine. What I would say is in that case, that what a historian can do is establish the essential facts to be explained, and then the historian in his off hours, so to speak, the historian as a human being, or as a philosopher, can then draw the inference to the resurrection of Jesus as the best explanation, because as a human being, he is not bound by the professional methodological constraints that he is when he's speaking within his discipline. So in that sense, it might be misleading to speak of a historical proof for the resurrection of Jesus. I think what we have good historical evidence for are the central facts about what happened after Jesus' death. And then I would say the best explanation of those, and that's a second step, would be the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead. And that needn't be thought of as a historical hypothesis. That can be simply a philosophical hypothesis or metaphysical hypothesis that best explains what history can prove.